We begin the show tonight with that breaking news. Jody Wilson-Raybould says the RCMP have spoken to her regarding the SNC-Lavalin controversy. That's after this exchange on our program last night. The RCMP has used some unusual language with CBC to make it apparent that they are seriously looking at launching an investigation into the Prime Minister's actions based on the Ethics Commissioner's reports. Have you been contacted by the RCMP on this?
I actually haven't seen what the RCMP has said today, but I leave any potential investigation in their capable hands.
They basically said that they usually never comment unless they lay charges, but they did tell the CBC that they're examining the matter carefully with all available information. They'll take appropriate actions as required. I'm just wondering, have they reached out to you at all in this?
They haven't reached out to me on this, no.
Power and Politics obtained this statement from Jody Wilson-Raybould. It reads, "To clarify my answer from yesterday, I was asked if the RCMP had contacted me in response to the Ethics Commissioner's report, and specifically since the RCMP's public statement yesterday. The answer is no. However, and after clarifying with the RCMP, I can confirm that I was contacted by them this past spring regarding matters that first came to the public's attention on February 7, 2019 in a Globe and Mail article." Ms. Wilson-Raybould goes on to say, "I will make no further statement regarding the content of my discussions and communications with the RCMP." So what does that all mean? For more, I'm joined by Chris Hall, CBC's National Affairs Editor and host of CBC Radio's The House. Hi, Chris.
Hey there.
Okay, so a development here. The significance, what do you think?
Well, a couple of things. In the interview yesterday, she made it clear she had a potential investigation, which implies that there isn't necessarily an investigation going on now. We don't know from the RCMP. They refused further comment to us today. Catherine Tunney, our colleague, contacting them about whatever contact there had been or whatever investigation might be ongoing. So here's what we're left with. Under the section of the Conflict of Interest Act, Section 49, we know that an ethics commissioner is not allowed to continue with their own probe if there is a police investigation or if there is reason to believe that there is an investigation going that would lead to criminal charges. So that never happened. In the case of, for example, when the former Ethics Commissioner Mary Dawson was looking into Nigel Wright's involvement in paying the expenses of Mike Duffy, she announced that she was suspending because the RCMP was, in fact, at that time investigating Mike Duffy. There was no suspension here in this case. So what does that mean? We know that the RCMP now did reach out at some point earlier this year to Jody Wilson-Raybould. It related to the first stories that the Globe and Mail broke about the improper interference. So what did they ask her? What did they say to her? We don't know. But we do know that they couldn't have done much because the RCMP, as I said, the Ethics Commissioner couldn't have continued his investigation if there was an active RCMP probe.
And what prompted the question in the first place for me yesterday is, again, our colleague Catherine Tunney received a statement from the RCMP when she went and asked again. Now, and we should say this is all precipitated by the opposition saying there should be an RCMP investigation after the release of that report. She asked them, normally we should tell our viewers, the RCMP just says nothing. Unless there are charges, they're silent. In this case, they said that they're, quote, examining the matter carefully with all available information. We'll take appropriate actions as required. And that sort of piqued our interest.
Yeah, it's kind of a storm, isn't it, from the RCMP? We've had twists, we've had turns. Now we have this little bit of a reversal here about what was going on. So yes, clearly the RCMP felt it was important enough to clarify the record to the extent that they felt they could by saying, we are going to be looking at the report. But it doesn't tell us what they did beforehand and why they felt it was important to talk to Jody Wilson-Raybould and to ask her questions. I would point out, I also talked to Jane Philpott. She's going to be on the House tomorrow. I asked her about some of the surprises she had found, as Jody Wilson-Raybould did, about the number of connections between SNC-Lavalin officials and the Prime Minister's office. I asked her after the interview whether she had actually raised any of these concerns with the RCMP, and she had not. And we talked to her again briefly, one of her assistants today, and she confirmed that she has not spoken to the RCMP. So different position. She wasn't directly involved in that first story about what might have transpired in terms of the pressure on Jody Wilson-Raybould by members of the Prime Minister's office. So clearly Jody Wilson-Raybould now says that, yes, I was contacted, but we still don't know precisely why, what they asked her. We do, and we can assume, I think, based on what the Conflict of Interest Act says that the Ethics Commissioner can't do, is that there was no active investigation.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see other people involved in this if they were contacted. Now, that's the next step for sure. All right, thank you,
no
Chris. I appreciate it. The CBC's Chris Hall. Welcome back. As we've been reporting, we learned earlier today that former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould was contacted by the RCMP in the spring. Yesterday, she said she hadn't been in the wake of the Ethics Commissioner's report, but she clarified that answer today. So what does this tell us about the likelihood that the Mounties will look into it or have been looking into it? Will MPs on the House Ethics Committee agree to hear witnesses on the report when they meet next week? Time for the Friday Power Panel in Montreal. Marty Patriquin is a columnist with the Montreal Gazette, and here with me in Ottawa, Mia Rabson is with the Canadian Press, and my CBC colleague Erin Ware joins us. Hi, guys.
Hey.
How are you? So I'll just remind our viewers, we did a little bit of it before the break, but the statement that Jody Wilson-Raybould, I mean, what I had asked her yesterday was whether the RCMP had contacted her. She interpreted that to mean regarding the Ethics Commissioner, following the release of the report, because the opposition had essentially renewed their call in the wake of that report for an RCMP investigation. She said no, she hadn't, but she had back in the spring. We don't know, Erin, the details of that conversation, nor I guess what came of it for certain.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly what they asked her. We don't know what she told them. I mean, we do know that she had, depending on the exact timing, she did go to committee in February and was asked by Elizabeth May whether she thought any crimes had been committed, and she said no.
Yes.
So for all we know, she may have said the same thing to the RCMP.
And just to quickly interrupt that, I had also asked her if those statements stood today in her view, and she said based on the relevant information she had, she also still believed nothing illegal had happened.
Right. So we don't know. So we don't know what the RCMP then did after that. I think is sort of the key part. Is did they talk to other people? How much more consideration did they give this? We know that they didn't talk to anyone in PMO. Did they talk to anyone else around Jody Wilson-Raybould? It's hard to know whether it's conceivable that they went and talked to Jody Wilson-Raybould and then said, we don't think there's anything here, we'll let it go. Then even in that case, you'd have to at least allow for the possibility that they looked at the commissioner's report this week and decided there was maybe further grounds for looking into it. But it's hard to know. But of course, at the end of the day, if you're the Liberals, you don't want RCMP in the headline, really.
No.
And there's a fair bit of history here going back to 2005 when the RCMP got involved and the Liberals, it arguably turned that election.
You just don't want RCMP in election.
Yeah, generally speaking, you don't want, and I think the risk here for the Liberals is that this isn't really resolved one way or the other in the next 2 weeks. And they have to go into a campaign with this as sort of an open question about whether the RCMP is looking into them.
And part of that, Mia, is because the RCMP does not confirm whether it's launched an investigation. And in fact, that's what had sort of propelled us or instigated our questioning to Jody Wilson-Raybould, because the comment that they offered our colleague Catherine Tunney and then other media outlets as well was sort of different than the usual no comment. Usually they only comment when charges have been laid. Instead, they said that they were examining the matter carefully with all available information and will take appropriate actions as required.
Absolutely. Everyone's sort of like, oh, okay, that's a little bit, what does that mean? Let's interpret that. But remember, the RCMP kind of got its wrist slapped over the one that Erin alluded to back in 2006 when they said in the middle of that campaign that they were investigating the finance minister at the time, Ralph Goodale, for interfering about income trusts and whatnot. They were told, the Public Complaints Commissioner from the RCMP said a couple of years later that he thinks it had an impact on that election, and that he doesn't think the RCMP should be releasing politically sensitive information during a campaign. Yeah. So the RCMP,
James Comey effect.
And then, of course, we also know that the election in the United States so we know that there are impacts. And so for the RCMP to say more than they usually do this close to an election definitely piqued a lot of interest and is certainly not what the Liberals wanted to hear. Of course, they also don't want the RCMP to come out, let's say, September 20th and say, well, we are investigating. Because even if 6 weeks later they say we found nothing, that people, the whole guilty till innocent, or innocent till guilty, doesn't exist in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point, Marty. And I mean, especially as we near an election, this is about the way in which each party can frame this, right? And if the opposition is able to say even the specter of an RCMP investigation is possible, and there's more than just sort of a hint of it, even though we don't know that to be true. I mean, there is potential damage just in that.
For sure. They have, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Greens, et cetera, have more ammunition today than they did, 72 hours ago. The one thing I would say about charges, if you sort of follow the logic, the RCMP as Mrs. Wilson-Raybould said, had contacted her at the time, and I would lead me to believe that they had the general gist of exactly what was going on within, between Jody Wilson-Raybould's office, the PMO, I mean, you name it, the finance minister, the Treasury Board, et cetera, all the pressure that was being put on her, either through her or by reading the Globe and Mail newspaper. The report this week, while damning, doesn't really stray from that narrative at all. The only thing it does is it puts more meat on it. It sort of really hammers home the fact, the point to what the extent the government wanted her to change her mind on this. So if there was necessarily going to be charges laid now, I don't think necessarily, well, there may or there may not be charges laid against the government. The government might be investigated, Mr. Trudeau might be investigated. I don't think the report as it is would necessarily change that one way or another, because I think a lot of the facts were already on the table.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, Aaron, and again, I think I've said that 15 times this week. I'm by no means a legal expert. But I remember asking the opposition earlier this week, if you think a law is broken, which one is it? And one of the ones they point to is obstruction of justice, which they used to before. The only thing this report adds to in that context is this idea that the ethics commissioner put forward that he wasn't able to get the information that he asked for from, I think it was 9 witnesses, he said, who said that the info they had was relevant but covered by cabinet confidence. That confidence wasn't waived by the clerk of the Privy Council, and then an order in council wasn't introduced by the Prime Minister in order to waive those confidences. That, from those conversations that seems to be what the opposition is pointing at right now. I don't know whether that,
Yeah, I don't know that I like you, I'm not a legal expert. I've watched many episodes of Law & Order, but that doesn't qualify.
I might rival you. I think I've watched every single one. Yeah.
They didn't cover obstruction well enough. I don't know that the opposition is looking at this from a legal scholarly background and deciding whether or not they want to pursue specific avenues. I think they are just doing everything possible to keep this story in the news. Not, of course, that I would ever suggest that a committee meeting would be called for cynical reasons. At this point, this is just, let's keep this story going for as long as possible in every way we can. And we'll see if we hit something. If memory serves, the ethics commissioner was first written to with a recommendation that he should pursue one part of the Conflict of Interest Act, and actually he ended up deciding, no, it's a different part of the Conflict of Interest Act. The opposition's job in this point isn't to figure out specifically which law has been broken or not. It's to just point to as many things as possible and see what happens. And that, I think, is basically what you're seeing right now.
What do you think, Mia?
I think that this was a gift to them in the sense that it got it back in the headlines. I mean, when this was sort of the relentless coverage of this back in February and March, I mean, those were long days for everybody. And that's when you finally started to see a significant drop in Liberal support. People were paying attention, they were watching. And then it kind of went out of the headlines and other things were happening and things started to change and sort of that free fall seemed to stop and things changed for the Liberals. Well, now they have it back in the headlines. But I've said many times this week, I can guarantee you the Liberals are very happy that if this had to come out, they wanted it now and not a month from now. We weren't sure when it was coming, but coming out now, I mean, not only is it before the election, they have time to sort of recover from whatever hits they might take, but it's August. And so, there's not as many people paying as much attention as they might be in the middle of an election campaign. It will have an impact. Obviously, there's still some things to come. And the opposition was happy that this brings it back in the headlines.
Yeah, again,
it gives them new ammunition.
The specter of an RCMP investigation, does genuinely keep it alive. Marty, you want to jump in?
Oh, just that we are the definition of inside baseball, the four of us right now, as is most of the pundit class and most of the journalist class, because this is the stuff that fascinates us. It doesn't fascinate Canadians right now. Where that changes is, as everybody has said, is that when you put the words RCMP into it, and that's where it shifts gears for everyone, because that is extremely, extremely damning, and it does not look good in a campaign. It's exactly why, though. I mean, the other interesting thing too is Justin Trudeau coming out and saying that he accepts the findings but doesn't want to apologize. That is a campaign catchphrase in embryo. You're going to be hearing a lot more of that. I refuse to apologize for trying to save Canadian jobs. You're going to hear that ad nauseum. I wouldn't be surprised if they make an ad out of it, because that is the strongest thing they have coming out of this.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.